The opinion of movie critics and whether or not they should be listened to is a topic that always comes around every so often. Especially when a movie with a controversial background or just a controversial movie in general comes out, you could almost always expect that there's going to be a divide in the ratings between the critics and the audience. But what we really need to dive into here is this phenomenon in franchise movies, movies that belong to a bigger fandom that not all critics are essentially a part of. One of the best examples of a rating divide in a movie is The Last Jedi. When that movie came out, it was more or less popular amongst critics who may or may not have even been real Star Wars fans and were just rating it based on their general enjoyment and how well of a film they viewed it was. And then there's the audience score, sitting at a whopping 42% on Rotten Tomatoes when this movie released, and still now, the general consensus among the audience is pretty negative. So why, in so many movies, does this happen? A flipped example would be Venom, with a whopping 30% critic score and 81% audience score. Then there's Captain Marvel with an 80% critic score, 45% audience score. What I want to ask is, why does this happen so often, and why does a movie that might be considered great among critics get hated for seemingly no reason by the general audience, the main group that these movies that belong to fandoms are essentially created for? So going back to The Last Jedi, speaking as a major Star Wars fan myself, discussing the sequel trilogy of other fans is mostly a dumpster fire because everyone has a different opinion on it, and each fan needs to make sure that everyone is aware of how radically different their own opinion is. This is where the critic divide starts. Every critic has their own opinion, obviously, but what allows them to have their opinion in a separate category from the rest of the audience is that they meet a set of general requirements as movie experts. On Rotten Tomatoes, some of the requirements consist of running your own review page for a certain amount of time. You also need to be submitting audience reviews consistently on Rotten Tomatoes in the audience category. And then with the audience category, there actually are no requirements because anyone who can make an account can submit their own shitty 0-star review because they want a movie to fail no matter the consensus among the reviewers. This is also what makes fandom movie viewers very powerful because most movie critics are not going to be aware of the 40+ year history of Star Wars and every bit of lore that goes into it. So when a critic watches The Last Jedi, as a movie, it is pretty good. It's pretty well made. There's great directing, there's great production, there's great acting, there's great sets, and there's satisfying fights. It's a pretty well made movie. But the average toxic Star Wars fan doesn't really care about that. What they care about is how the sudden logistics of hyperspace being the most important part of the movie. Since The Last Jedi is extremely controversial among Star Wars fans because a lot of the 40-year lore is challenged, fans went and review bombed the hell out of that movie. Hence, the very low audience score it has compared to the critic score. Even more power to the fandom is that if your average 40-year-old mom watches The Last Jedi and then absolutely loves it, there's an almost 0% chance that they're going to go and write a positive review on Rotten Tomatoes. Why? Because 40-year-old moms of children do not use Rotten Tomatoes as they have actual lives and don't live to make the movie business. This allows for the vast majority of the audience score to be from the users of the Star Wars fandom who want to go and just bomb the hell out of The Last Jedi. This is backed up by the fact that when you look at a new movie that may have not even been released globally, the first and audience score reviews are listed as verified, meaning that they actually had to confirm with Rotten Tomatoes that they paid to see the movie. And Rotten Tomatoes has to do this because if they don't, tons of toxic fans are going to flood the movie with bad reviews even if they might have not even seen it yet. Something a lot of people don't either know or may have also forget about Rotten Tomatoes is that it's the score that is given is not a number score like in Metacritic, for example. It is the percentage of viewers that gave the movie a quote-unquote fresh score. Black Panther, for example, is currently sitting at 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. On Metacritic, this would mean that the average score given is 96%, but that's not how Rotten Tomatoes works. This means that of the 528 current critic reviews, 96% gave it a fresh rating, meaning that the average score could only be like 70, maybe even like 65, but since that 70 is still fresh, it contributes to that much higher tomato meter score. So this is my theory on why movies, and mostly fandom movies, almost always have some sort of divide among critics and reviewers. A lot of people will always say that you should never look at the reviews and base your opinion off your own experience. And while I of course agree with that you should base your opinion off your own experience, if you are aware of how these sites actually work, like Rotten Tomatoes, then they can offer a lot of insight into how other people receive the movie before or after you actually see it yourself. Thanks.